My name is Diane Alfred. I am the Community Service and Development Director here with We Are One United. And just for a little bit of housekeeping, if we can just keep our lines muted so that it isn't disruptive to our presenter. And please feel free if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can place them in the chat and we will definitely get to your questions, but we want to make sure that we give our presenter ample time to do what he does. I'd like to welcome all of you and all of our Zoom, those are not a part of We Are One United. I'd like to welcome you tonight to the Cafe, where we expect to have an informative and robust conversation tonight on the topic that I think we all are familiar with or have been impacted by in some way or another, whether it was a friend, a family member, or somebody you just knew, or some of the work that we do as community servants. Tonight, we want to talk about a wicked problem in our communities that is often a great plague. There is no definitive answer to how to mitigate it. However, there are so many of us that is doing the work to try to bring people up from this crisis. And that is none other than the dangers and the crisis of substance abuse. Tonight, we have with us to bring his expertise and insight to this topic, Dr. James B. Golden from the Tarzana Treatment Centers College. And we're going to give Dr. Golden ample time. We're going to turn it over to you to further introduce yourself and let's get started.
Well, thank you so much, Diane. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you guys can hear me. I'm always concerned about my lighting in my office. As a dark Black man, I have to make sure that, I look appropriate on screen. I want to temper this by saying that I am not like a pretentious speaker. And even though I have a doctor in front of my name, this is very much a conversation and it's a very needed one. I will interject some information and I'm not going to be too data heavy or any of that. I really am interested in what's going on in your communities and how we can help to, shape and reshape the amount of drug use and overdose deaths and substances that are being used in your communities. And I think I am I'm a traditional educator, so I definitely cannot talk for an entire hour. I'm definitely going to rely on the group. And I have a lot of interactive things that I'd like for us to explore together and analyze. But the first thing, and this is always my my hard suit, is sharing my screen because I never do it correctly. So I want you guys to pray for me. I can do this correctly. It's already on something else. Okay, and after all these can you
I think you're frozen. You're muted, sir.
Sorry about that. My computer loves to act up. So I think what we'll do is we'll just get started. Let's see if this works. Can you guys see just the slide?
Yes, a welcome slide.
Okay, it's always a process with me. So first and foremost, I don't want to spend a long time talking about me. That can get very boring. But I do want you guys to know why I'm passionate about what I do. And my background for the last 20 plus years has been in service to communities. I was raised and started working in Salinas, California with the mayor of the city. We were working to address some gang issues in the community. And that sparked an early on passion that I had to really help us evolve as communities. And evolution really is my core value in life. I think that that's what I'm here to really help us do in this world. So I came down to Los Angeles, went to school, and I started working in the treatment profession in a lot of different levels, from being an intake specialist to a counselor, to working with the criminal justice system and the juvenile halls to identify youth in need of substance use treatment and work around family reunification, gangs, and sex offenses. And so I went from there and I worked in a celebrity rehab, which was its own fun situation. And I say fun facetiously, but it was a situation in there. And I spent a long time working with children, and from all ages of the spectrum, from 0 to 5, who were battling autism, all the way up through transitional age youth who are battling all of the transitions from childhood into adulthood. So I'm here, and I've been an educator for a long time. And in the K through 12 system, I've taught college workshops, and I am a career poet. So it's just like an amalgamation of a lot of different things that make this very unique and very handsome guy. So that is a little bit about me. Currently, I work at Tarzana Treatment Centers, which is the foremost expert organization on substance use in California, and probably we're getting close to being the biggest and I think most important in our country as well. One of the reasons why is 3 years ago, we launched TTC College, which is a separate college, but we're under our organization's charter, and we provide peer support certifications for people who are interested in helping out people who have experienced things that they have with mental health and substance use. And we have a GED program that provides free GED test prep and testing for the community. But what I'm most excited about is our baby program. It was our first program that we wrote for our school, which was our substance use disorder counseling program. And you'll hear me reference that quite a bit while we're going. I promise I'm not going to talk you to death. But I wanted to start with a quick activity. And I need 100% compliance. I need to hear from every single person, because I don't want anybody leaving today feeling like they didn't get to answer a question that they had, that I didn't get to answer it. So in the chat, and I'm going to find the chat while you're doing this, can you please write, what are you hoping to get from our moment together tonight? I'm probably going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have time to really dig into some of the stuff that's going on with you guys. So please, in the chat, it doesn't have to be long, but what are you hoping to get from today? When you came in and you heard that this incredible guy was going to be talking to you guys, what is it that you would like to walk away with? So just throw that in the chat, and I promise I will get to those pieces as soon as, oh, I found it. Okay. As soon as I find the chat. And then another quick piece for me is, where are you guys from? Which, what locations or what cities? If you guys could just unmute really quickly and just let me know, where are you guys located, so I don't start talking about Beverly Hills statistics.
Well, I'm in Fontana.
Beautiful.
I'm in Palm Springs.
Okay.
San Bernardino.
Okay. SB is here.
I am in India.
Indio. Okay, I love this area. You guys are in a great area.
San Bernardino, specifically
specifically Cal State San Bernardino, by the way?
So San Bernardino, I heard Zubair say Riverside.
Go
Are
Yotes.
there any other cities that we haven't mentioned?
I'm in a different state. I'm in Hawaii.
Okay, one of my best friends just moved back from Hawaii, so congratulations, beautiful. I want to be, so I don't forget, I have our deputy provost on the call, who's Haben Burhi, and I'd love for you guys to get her contact information if you are interested in more partnership with TTC College or with the work that we do. We love to support you in your either individual, your collective, or your organization efforts. So that is there, and I'll ask Haben to put her email in the chat. And I have at the end, I'll give you my contact information. Okay, I'm done talking. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So I do want to, you guys must be thinking of them. I'm sure they're gonna be in there within the next 5 to 10 minutes. So throw your questions in the chat and I'm gonna move on. I wanna do a quick introduction activity and you'll see where I'm going with this. And if I could just have 1 to 2 volunteers that are willing and brave enough to be vulnerable for a second. And the prompt is, hi, my name is blank, and I am from blank. One thing you cannot tell just by looking at me is blank. And I'll give you an example. So, hi, my name is James. I am from Tarzana Treatment Centers in LA County. And one thing you cannot tell just by looking at me is I have an autoimmune disorder. Can I have a couple volunteers? I'm seeing some people who are ready. I feel it in my spirit.
I'll go. Hi,
Wonderful.
my name is Diane, and I'm from We Are One United. One thing you cannot tell just by looking at me is that I am really nervous right now.
Really?
Really.
Oh, we can't tell at all. Listen, guys, she's
You are
nervous
doing
because I'm on here, and we want to make sure that I don't say anything. No, this is wonderful. Thank you for being vulnerable, Diane. Who else do we want to hear from? I'm not sure. Angelica, did you have, or are you about to unmute and say something?
I have to think of something first.
Okay, I just wanted to check in and see. Okay, good. So I think one of the things about this activity that I want you guys to think about is when you're raised in America and when you're raised in a climate where substance use historically started off with prohibition and this idea of things being wrong, substance use being a criminal issue, substance use being an issue of people wanting to terrorize their communities or their families. That is the society that we have been raised in. And so when we see drug use, a lot of times we say bad, 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 or we think about the people who use substances as criminals or as they were referred to in the 80s, crack mothers, crack babies. The president of the United States in the 80s held up a paper bag on national television and said, this is crack. And people who use crack are dangerous to our society. And then that same president launched a war on drugs, which has ravaged many communities, including the Inland Empire and many of the areas that you guys are coming from. These are things that have been programmed into our minds. And so what we do at TTC College is we flip that. And we understand that substance use is not a behavioral issue. It's not a threat to the community as far as people who use drugs are dangerous. These are all stereotypes that we have adopted. And so what we tend to teach our students is that substance use is a medical condition. Okay, the same way that we may go to treatment for diabetes or hypertension or cancer or any other type of medical illness, HIV, SUD falls into the same area. So specifically, when we think about substance use disorders, and sometimes you guys will hear the word addicted. In our field, we use SUD because it's less stigmatizing. But a very clear and simple definition, so we're all on the same page. SUD is a disease that affects a person's brain and behavior and leads to an inability to control the use of a legal or illegal drug or medicine. This is very blanket. But what's important that's said here is that it affects a person's brain and behavior. And that makes this a brain disorder, which means that when we think about our community and people who use substances, we must approach this from a medical lens. These are people who are dealing with a condition that a lot of times they cannot control. And so you may hear family members, mothers and fathers who are saying, I grounded my child, I've done all these different things and they're still using. And part of it is because we're treating a behavior rather than a medical condition. So I want to temper that and start us off on the same note about what we're talking about. And so when we think about this, in particular, I lost my chat again. Okay, here we go. And I'm seeing myths about substance use from Saber. What we want to think about is one of the greatest myths that have been discussed primarily is that people who use substances are a danger to the community. I see that there's a question about, I'm hoping to learn about what we can do about unseen substance abuses. Okay, we can talk about that. As a lot of things can't be invisible, yet it's still dangerous. Also, if possible, to get training for community members. Yes. Let me answer that last part really quickly. Yes, you can get training for community members or organizations. Email Haben. She put her email in the chat. So she'll be the person to reach out to you and she can get you connected to the right trainer. Daniel, thank you for sharing. And I think that trigger warnings are important. Raise your virtual hand if you have either experienced or you know someone who's been impacted by substance use. Okay, I'm seeing Daniel with his hand up. I'm seeing some virtual hands go up on Zoom. I'm seeing Angelica stand up. So this is something that we all share together, and there's no stigma in that. Okay, so let's talk about really quickly, and I don't want to bore you guys to death, common symptoms of an SUD, and there's a reason why I'm starting with this. Whether you are assessing yourself, whether you're talking to someone who potentially has a substance use disorder, whether you're talking to a family member of somebody who they believe has a substance use disorder, whether you're popping up at a school and you're noticing certain things, these are the general characteristics that you can go to that will red flag for you when somebody might need treatment or an assessment. The first is feeling that you have to use the drug regularly, daily, or even several times a day. So in particular, when I talk to people who do not believe they have an alcohol problem, which we call an alcohol use disorder once they're diagnosed, one of the questions I always ask is, well, how often do you drink? And they say, well, I have wine every day after work. Cool. How much do you drink? Oh, I drink a bottle and a half every day. It's wine, they were drinking wine in the Bible. And so these are real conversations. I think a lot of times those are the red flags. sometimes where it's like, oh, okay, you probably don't think that you have a substance use problem because you can get up and go to work the next day. But it might actually be affecting your brain and your physiology in your body. Having intense urges for the drug that blocks out any other thoughts. So, this would be, if you have an intense urge to use, and most of the time it will be physiological. You start getting a headache or you'll start getting the shakes. Over time, needing more of the drug to get the same effect. So that's how we go from drinking half a glass of wine every day to drinking a bottle and a half. Taking larger amounts of drugs over a longer period than you intended. Making certain that you maintain a supply of drugs. So these are people who are like, okay, I know my rent is due, but let me go ahead and purchase this cocaine really quickly because I want to make sure I have enough to last me for the next 2 weeks till I get paid. When you start treating the substance the way that you would think about providing food for your child, it really does push you into that category possibly of a substance use disorder. Spending money on the drug, even though you can't afford it, what we just talked about. Not meeting obligations and work responsibilities, or cutting back on social and recreational activities. And this is what we call detachment. And when you start to see people off of their baseline and you start to see them missing work and not meeting obligations or staying home from school all the time, a lot of that is related to a substance use disorder. Continuing to use the drug even if you know it's causing problems. So if I'm smoking cigarettes and I have lung issues and it's hard for me to jog, that's a physiological issue, which means I might be addicted to nicotine, which is a very powerful drug and substance. It just happens to be legal, unfortunately, in the United States. Doing things to get the drug that you normally wouldn't do, such as stealing. So when you start to think about societal impacts, especially in the cities that you live in, and we start to think about the young women who enter the sex trafficking ring, or we see people who are doing things that they wouldn't usually do, a lot of times that's tied into a substance use disorder. And you want to pay attention to somebody who's, if I start stealing tomorrow and I tell her, Ben, I just stole this thing, she might look at me and say, you okay? Is everything okay? Are you possibly using substances? Because you don't steal things. Driving or doing other risky activities when you're under the influence. This is another big one. People who are like, oh, I can drive and smoke weed because I know how to do that. But you don't. You don't know how to. Spending a good deal of time getting the drug, using the drug, or recovering from the effects of the drugs. If I'm taking vacation days so I can handle how much I drank, then I'm probably drinking too much. Failing in your attempts to stop using the drug and experiencing withdrawal symptoms when you attempt to stop taking the drugs. Do any of these sound familiar to you guys? Are any of these things that you've seen or experienced, or is this putting on one of those Oprah light bulbs of, this reminds, maybe Susie might have a substance use disorder? You can just put a thumbs up if you.
Yeah, these are all familiar.
Okay. So, pay attention as either a provider, a community member, a peer, an associate. You want to actively know when the people you're working with are off of their baseline. And not for judgmental reasons, but more so, I want to get you help. I want you to be successful. And there's a lot of tools for people who use substances. Once you've identified that somebody has used substances, then they enter what's called a continuum of care. The continuum of care for LA County goes from level 0, which means that you're not at risk, necessarily of a substance use disorder. This might be an elementary school student. Where it changes is when you get to middle school and you are then confronted with drug use pretty much daily because students are vaping in class, students are smoking weed, taking pills, drinking. We know that the Inland Empire in 2020 in particular had a huge fentanyl raid, and that was a huge moment for, I think, the IE to realize, oh, okay, we have something going on out here and we need some support. So you have your people who you would consider sort of on the zero of the continuum, and these are the ones that you're just going to do some prevention work with. We just don't want you to end up in a situation where you might use a drug. So let me give you some materials. Let me link you to SAMHSA. Let me talk to your teachers and do a presentation about what really happens when you're on drugs. And I'm not talking about the DARE presentations because those are really traumatic and racist. I'm talking about the ones that are really about protecting the youth and protecting the people in your community, and not about, you know, siding with the war on drugs. I'm not going to go through the entire continuum, but what I do want you to see is that depending on where the person is assessed at, and when we do an assessment, Daniel may say, you know what, I have a friend who fits one of those symptoms that Golden talked about on the last slide. I'm going to call Tarzana and have them reach the 800 number. The person on the phone can do what's called a phone screen. And during that phone screen, we ask a short series of questions that go a little bit deeper into the psychosocial needs of the individual. And from there, we'll decide where should they be placed on this continuum. If somebody is suicidal and they are using substances, they're going to go into a medically monitored intensive program, a program that is also dealing with the psychological issues that they're having, and they're under medical supervision. Whereas you might have somebody who just started using drugs about a year ago, and it's affected their life, it's impacted their life, but it hasn't impacted it to where they can't go to work or school. So they may go through what's called an outpatient program. And so that's our continuum of care. And God bless all of the scientists and psychologists that work to assess people. It's a very difficult task to assess people because you can't do a blanket on the community. The other piece that affects, especially the areas that you all live in, is when we think about the people who use substances in your areas, we have to consider their intersections. And Kimberly Crenshaw created this idea of intersectionality alongside the critical race theory piece for education. But intersectionality is important in substance use because we know that people use substances for different reasons. A good example of that is we work with the Native Indigenous community. And because of some of the sociological impacts of what the wars and the stolen land has caused, the alcohol has become a pretty severe, it's impacted the reservations pretty severely. And so we know that that is not just, we decided to wake up and start drinking. We know that that has sociological impacts. And so when we know that, that is an intersection. If I'm Native American and if I live in California, that is a specific intersection that has to be addressed a specific way. As somebody who's indigenous that lives in Alabama is going to need something different than somebody who's indigenous and lives in Palm Springs. And so as people who are concerned about your community, what you want to start to do is evaluate the community that you live in, and who are the people that are there, and what is the historical reasons that the substances are there. In rural areas, and I know that the IE is not considered necessarily a rural area in the same way that Palmdale or Lancaster might be, or Yucaipa, or somewhere that just feels like it's off in the bushes. I mean, you can take the train very easily to get to the main cities from the IE. But what's happening in the Inland Empire right now? What intersections are causing the amount of drug use that you guys have? When we think about the lack of resources, that's the first thing I can tell you. There's not enough drug treatment in your areas. There's not enough drug counselors in your areas. So when you have an entire community of people who do not have the same luxuries of substance use clinics like we have in the San Fernando Valley, then that contributes to more drug use. When you have a high environmental danger zone, when people are traumatized from things like mass shootings in the IE, by concerns around global warming, concerns around gang activity, concerns around safety issues, not drug related, which have all upticked in Santa Barbara, which have all upticked in that area. All of those different pieces create intersectional people. And so you have to address the intersections and not just say this is a San Bernardino issue. So what's happening in Black San Bernardino? What are the organizations and communities that feed into the Black population, as an example, in that area? And if we can get in there and then do some work around prevention and education and providing counseling opportunities and things like this, roundtables, then what you're doing is you're starting to decrease how substance use shows up there. If we think about not just what's happening today, but where we're going in the future, we're not seeing a lessening of drug use in our communities across the board in America. And so in particular, we know that the Latinx, Black, and Asian populations will continue to grow in the United States. And we project that by 2050, a quarter of our country will be Latinx. And we know that racial health disparities, if you are born into a Black or brown body, you're more likely to suffer with a substance use disorder and go untreated. And this is where that intersectionality comes in, because who's going to speak for your community members who are not white, who are not male? How do we get counseling and prevention into those communities? And so the part of the concern here is that as we continue to increase the population of people of color, specifically the Black and Latinx communities have the greatest barriers to accessing, completing, and having satisfactory substance use treatment. So all that stuff that I just talked about the continuum of care, it doesn't matter if you can't access treatment. It just doesn't matter. It's a system that you don't have access to. So my advice to anybody who's looking to impact your community with substance use is to get in the community, to go deeper into it and speak to the churches, speak to the schools, the after-school programs, to go to coalitions and go to that big old San Bernardino, Cal State San Bernardino. I went and did a reading up there, and there's drug use definitely going on. I think that there are people who can really benefit from people like you guys going in. Okay. That's all I have for my basic things, but I wanted to see what specific things, what questions do you guys have? What are some pointers that you're looking for? How can we talk a little bit deeper about substance use that applies to the work that you guys are doing?
I think, Dr. Golden, for me, as trying to work in this space of community development, and new in this space, trying to find the avenues and the connections, and I think your organization, college, is one of them now,
Yes.
as to how to get those doors open to have these conversations, because like you said earlier, it's going to require these type of forums and getting the word out and having real conversation with those that are in positions to change policy, to change accessibility and things like that. So I think my biggest question is, how do I do that?
Yeah. I say start with your local politicians is always the best place to start, city councils. And the reason why is because they, one, need to get reelected, and two, they have a responsibility to make sure that the community is safe. They are elected officials. And so that is always the first place that I start, is with our assigned city council member for that area. Most of the time, that city council member has the connections that you need. And right now is the perfect time for you guys to initiate that in your area, to have those discussions with supervisors and with the council and mayors, because this is national attention on your area today about the impacts of substance use in your communities in Palm Springs, in San Bernardino, in Indio, et cetera. So this is the perfect time to show up at a city council meeting and get on the agenda. This is the perfect time to start a letter writing campaign to say, you know what, it's unacceptable that we do not have government funded treatment and we don't have enough of it accessible in our communities. What are you guys going to do about that? What funds are you going to pour into that? How can you connect with someone like Haben or TTC College? And that's what I would say to your city officials, is there are people who are willing to come and help us in this community. Zubair's a great example of that. This is somebody who is graduating next week with a certification in this. And just him having that experience means that you may save a few lives in your area, literally, especially with the way that fentanyl has ravaged our communities. And having people who know what Narcan is, and people who can pass out fentanyl test strips, or who can tell people you can go use at a safe site where you'll be monitored. So that way, if you do overdose, there's a medical professional there who can support you. Clean needle exchanges. These are all harm reduction programs that are meant to rebuild communities and to take away the stigma associated to using drugs. We need to help the major organizations in your cities to understand that their voice and their finances are important in turning around the drug use issue in the communities. And you can't blame the victim for being oppressed. People are using drugs in this country for many different sociological reasons. So we all have a responsibility. So I would get on the phone, I would show up at meetings. I'm somebody who will run people down. I am the person who will call, show up at your office, send you a box of bagels and say, listen, we have to address this right now. And what are you going to personally do about it? So I hope to answer your question.
Yes, thank you.
All right, what other thoughts are we have? What other questions do you have? What's up?
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, my question's in the chat, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so I can take a look at, I saw you unmuted. Okay. Thank you for reminding me of the chat's up there. Okay, can drinking caffeine-based drinks, coffee, for example, be a form of SUD? Yes. Caffeine is a very serious and impactful drug on your body. As I drink my Starbucks at 7 o'clock at night. So trust, I will be up all night. But I have another meeting right after this. So caffeine is a very serious and impactful drug on your body, depending on how much you use. And I try to get my team to get off of it as much as possible. I have several staff who drink Monsters. Caffeine, it's a brain, it impacts your brain and your body the same way that heroin does. It might not kill you the same way, but it does have detrimental impacts, especially if you come from a marginalized community. If you're a Black person who's drinking coffee and you already are at a higher risk of hypertension because of general racism and historical health issues, then it can be very, very detrimental. But then on the other side, there are many cultures who use caffeine and coffee and different things as part of their cultural rituals. So it's not about, again, it's not about being bad. It's about going back to that list of symptoms and thinking about, okay, if the caffeine's affecting my body to the point where I have a headache every day and I can, it's hard for me to do my work, then I might need to stop drinking caffeine, or I might need to limit it. I hope that answered your question, Daniel.
The reason why I ask is because I remember it was about a couple months back, if I remember correctly, caffeine withdrawals. I got a little taste of that.
Yes.
I honestly kind of felt like I almost passed out, but anyway.
Because you probably almost did.
Yeah.
And I've been through caffeine withdrawal about 4 to 6 times in my life. So I definitely understand.
Yeah. And for a little while, I switched to decaf because I thought that would kind of solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But, every so often I slip in a little bit of actual coffee and, so yeah, it's a bit of a, try not to curse here. So a bit of a BITCH, but
yeah, do what makes your body feel good. Now, I think one of the things to think about, and Zubair knows this, but there are classifications of drugs. Caffeine is in a classification. It is a legal drug. And so one of the things you want to think about, the big concern right now are the drugs that are causing people to die and overdose at exponential rates. We are co-located in a lot of our hospitals out here. And Haben and I will be attending Glendale Adventist Hospital next week to put on a program with their emergency department staff about how to help people who come into the hospital with an overdose. But what's happening, especially in the IE, is that there are an exponential amount of people who are dying from the substance because, first of all, there's not a reason for people to die of overdoses today. Not with the amount of Narcan that's available. I have it up in my office, stapled to the wall, because somebody could walk down the hall and they can pass out and you won't know if it's from opioids or not. So I'm gonna give them Narcan because it doesn't hurt the body, even if they're not high or not overdosing. But when they are, and you give them that Narcan, you feel like you just saved a life, what you did. And that is the most important thing. I think you guys want to deal with the big issues right now, which are fentanyl, which are heroin, and which are meth in your areas. And those are the drugs that are consistently killing people. A lot of people are starting out their drug use by using over-the-counter medication, which then becomes opioid prescriptions. And, you know, like what happens is that if I am living with my grandparents and they have all of these opioids because they need them, that puts me at risk because all I have to do is go in the medicine cabinet. And then boom, you know, I start taking one just because my teachers get on my nerves. And then I look up and I'm taking 10 Vicodin a day. And that is where people are overdosing because nobody starts doing drugs expecting to become addicted or expecting to die from it. So if you guys can, you know, pressure your hospitals and your city council to take action immediately and to partner with groups like Tarzana Treatment Centers, TTC College, whichever sober pathways you guys have out there, the rehabs and the treatment centers that exist in your community, those are great places to start because I guarantee you they're already fighting that fight. And so to have community members involved, I think will really help with those issues. So that was probably a very long and unnecessary answer to that. But Diane, you said, how does person-centered model fit into recovery treatment programs? So I'm glad you brought that up. And the person-centeredness in general is the direction of healthcare globally that we're going in and that we're pushing people to go in to reduce what we call racial health disparities. And that goes back to this idea of intersectionality. It's that saying that we have to look at the intersections of people who use drugs is the same as saying we have to look at the whole person. Because you can't just go to school and learn about therapy and think that those tools are going to apply to everyone. I may not even believe in Western science. And so then how do you ask me what motivates you as a gay Black man living in an urban area? What is it that will motivate you to get off of drugs? What is it that will motivate you to stop drinking coffee or to start using safe sites? So that is the lane that we're all going in as professionals. And Zubair and all of our students are trained to look at the individual and to not just do a blanket statement or, you know, sort of a status quo statement. So very much on the horizons. Any other questions, thoughts that you guys are having, things that you're wondering?
There's one other question in the chat that's asked, what would you tell a patient who has a substance abuse problem? Would you advise him to stop, or how would you approach this with them?
Good, good. So the thing about being an ally in this case, whether you're a counselor or a peer or you run into somebody at Starbucks, believe me, it happens. I was at the car wash and I was talking to one of my students, and Zubair and all of my students know I'm very dramatic and very extra. So when I get on the phone, I'm talking to the student about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and how to use that in your sessions. And once I got off the phone, I was getting ready to leave, and this lady who was sitting, and she was like, I just want you to know I overheard your conversation. And she was like, what you said helped me with something that I'm going through. And so I think that when we think about our community and how we support them, we have to be careful what we say. And we have to normalize certain things. You know, when people come into or when they get ready to say, I have a substance use problem or I need help, is usually what people will say. There's a lot of shame and embarrassment that comes with that. And it's very difficult to have somebody just come up to you and say that, whether you're a counselor or not. So a lot of times what I do is I try to normalize it and I say, listen, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a problem. You have a medical issue and I can help you with that. There are medications, there are groups that you can go to, there are counselors that you can have. You can do a residential program. I can help you get into detox. And that's the language that we use, is more of an I can help, help me help you, asking them, what would you like to see happen? Maybe I don't want to stop drinking. Maybe I just want to stop doing heroin. And honestly, as somebody who's listening, if somebody told me that was in my family, I would do everything I could to get them off heroin, and I would not hound them about alcohol, because they're more likely to die right now from using heroin. And so that's called harm reduction. And even the speech that we use with people, we want to use harm reduction. Now, do I want you to be off of heroin and alcohol? Probably, especially if, alcohol is a problem. But I'd rather see you smoke a cigarette than to smoke crack. And you're still going to have long-term impacts. You still have an SUD, but that might save your life today. So, look at it from when you speak. I would speak to them as if you're talking to somebody who's suicidal, or someone who just found out they have diabetes, and to use the compassion that we would use with those people as well. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. As well stated, Dr. Golden. We appreciate you. We're wrapping up. We're in the last, 6 minutes? 6 minutes of our cafe time. And we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an incredible amount of information shared with us. And we look forward to partnership to kind of learn how we as an organization can begin to bridge with other organizations to mitigate these much needed problems. I think they're elevating as we speak, to mitigate these things. Zubair, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really, my question is that I was reading, and what I saw is that sometimes as counselors, when you get these kind of patients, some of them really either grow up without hearing, we love you, we care for you. And some of them really take it overboard, think that maybe a counselor is in love with them.
Mm-hmm.
How can you really avoid to get into that, as you know, ethics and all the laws that a patient cannot really just take it overboard, think differently?
It's so hard because there's so many nuances when you're working with people. So I might say one thing to you and I might say something different or say the same thing to Diane and she interprets it completely differently. So the big thing is to just have good self-awareness. When things are getting kind of weird, and it's like, let me go back and remind you that I'm your counselor. And that is a very real issue in healthcare in general. We have our patients for a long time. I used to have patients for 2 and 3 years, and they saw me as a father. And so there was a lot of boundary issues with that, where it's like, okay, well, I can be a father figure. I can do things and say things that you didn't hear growing up, but I'm not your father. And I need to be able to be in this role in order to help you. Because if I go into that other role, I'm not able to help you the same. And if I have 60 clients, then I definitely cannot do that with everyone. So I do think, I front load everything in the beginning. And I say, this is what it's going to look. This is what our relationship is. This is the patient provider kind of relationship. And there's going to be times where we're going to get really close because you're going to say things to me that you may have never said before. And I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that I'm your counselor. And so we do want to have that boundary there. And that's really how I approach it. And most people, if you say that from the beginning, and then you have to remind them 2 months down the line, oh, remember we talked about on day one? Like, this is kind of happening a little bit. So I just wanted to pull it back.
Thank you. Very well stated, because it is a necessity in the work that we do to make clear those boundaries as we work with various ones in the community. Want to thank everybody for being here tonight, especially our guest, Dr. Golden, and the staff that joined him tonight, the provost. We thank you for coming in and just sitting with us a while and having this much needed conversation. Just want to invite you to our upcoming cafes. If you're not busy on Wednesday evenings at 6 p.m., we do this weekly, and we have various topics that come across for our youth, for technology, for a whole lot of different things that we talk about, because it's necessary to have conversation. And so upcoming, we're ready for the holidays. We're having a holiday baking and decorating class on next cafe with Marian Bravo from Pastel Bravo Cakes and Holiday Traditions in our diverse community of Coachella Valley. And we invite you all to please come back.